Hello! So in the last video, we looked back at the year of 2023 for One Piece. What did it look like? What chapters were delivered? What was each month focused on? And this video, we're gonna look forward. We're gonna look into 2024, probably also beyond. In fact, definitely beyond. There's no way all this is happening in 2024, but we're looking at the conclusion to Egghead and a little bit further than that as well. It's gonna take me a little bit to build my foundation and these theories, I'm not gonna lie. A little bit all over the place, but I'm not a theorizer. This is not my strong suit. However, I did just reread Egghead Island for the last video, and that got me making some abstract connections, so I wanted to share some of them with you. So let's go back to the beginning of Egghead, where the crew is picked up by a giant robot, and Lilith laments that it's impossible to control the urges of living creatures. She sent the shark out to report and bombard, but she couldn't override its core instinct, and that ended up taking over. So we've been talking a lot in the chapter reviews about Kuma and the fact that he is his personality was stripped of him. His free will and sense of self were stripped away in this deal that he made to save Bonnie. So one of the most burning questions is, so can he get his consciousness back? Is it being stored somewhere? Is there something that can revive it? And the answer, I think, is definitely yes. Thematically, one of the things that's been built up the most in this series is that of free will. And the fact that the very beginning of Egghead began with Lilith pointing out that that the core instinct can't be overridden in creatures that are being controlled, and then that very same theme has been reinforced in cases like the Seraphim, like S-Snake, where Boa's core instinct, her love for Luffy, overrode the commands that she was given. Not only that, but I think even York can be an example of this, because York is a part of Vegapunk. She is a facet of his being, and you would think that she would be loyal to Vegapunk, but her core instinct, which I suppose is greed, overrode her loyalty to Vegapunk, and she ended up betraying him. So I think the really obvious answer is that Kuma's programming will be overridden by his core instinct. And I mentioned this in the last chapter review that I did, that I kind of had a gut feeling that the reason Kuma and Bonnie were kept apart is a lot deeper than just, oh, if they're together, then they might run off together, or like just being cautious. I actually think it's a part of the programming. I think that the reason Kuma was forced to not visit Bonnie again after her healing was complete is because once Kuma has his free will stripped of him and this programming that makes him more of a mindless servant to the world government, I think this programming can be overridden by his core instinct, which is certainly love for Bonnie. Which is why I think when we come out of the flashback, Kuma is going to snap out of this programming, and he's going to be able to be loyal to Bonnie and fight alongside of her, but we'll get to that. We'll get to that final fight later. But to be honest, most of the video isn't going to be about that. But sticking with the theme of free will and your core instinct being able to override someone trying to control you, I think that continues to be a theme even with the admirals. We have the two active, one ex-admiral that all were forced to face a situation that they didn't want to be a part of. Kuzan had to fight his old mentor, Garp. Kizaru had to fight multiple people he had a friendship with and really cared about, and was very open that he didn't want to do it. Akainu had to fight Kuma, who he seems to have seen himself in, calling him a puppet, but he also might have some personal attachment to Bonnie. His is a bit more of a stretch, but he killed Ace, so I don't really care to psychoanalyze him very much. But seeing all three of these admirals, including Kuzan, who's no longer an admiral but now working for Blackbeard and still having to face off against Garp under Blackbeard's command. Each of them, especially Kuzan and Kizaru, really do fit in with this theme of control and of free will. With Kuzan, he didn't agree with what the government was doing, and so he left. He became a rogue agent, but then he got in line with Blackbeard, and he was still being forced to do things that he didn't want to do. How's that going to result in his arc? What choices is he going to make? I don't know, but it seems like he continually finds himself in the role of being used, and he's trying to work out his free will. Then you have Kizaru, who is just a cog in the machine, openly says multiple times that he doesn't want to be doing what he's doing, and even tries to do it in the most honorable way he can manage, because that's the best he can do for himself. But I do think that Kizaru is going to also end up turning against what is being pressed on him, what's being forced on him, and stand alongside the comrades that he's had for years, the people that he's cared about for years, I should put it that way. And I think that that'll be a really good parallel to Kuma, because Kuma will be overcoming his programming, his core self will override that program, and then Kizaru will be the human form of that. His humanity hasn't been taken from him in the physical sense, but kind of in the metaphorical sense it has, as he's equated himself to a cog in the machine instead of as his own individual person. So in a more metaphorical sense, his humanity and his sense of self have also been stripped of him, and he's going to be able to respond to his core instinct and fight alongside the people that he actually cares about and believes in, instead of the one that views humans as insects and disposable. I think it would be a cool parallel, and I think thematically it really fits with what we've been doing through the arc. Who knows? Light is also a big theme in this arc. Vegapunk is the one that created the source of energy that helped the entire world, and also it's supposedly energy is one of the greatest causes of war in the world, and Vegapunk apparently helped with that by making energy accessible all around the world, and he wants to create a world of free energy for the entire world. In this quest, Vegapunk is getting closer to the ancient energy that was a power source for the Iron Giant. Also, Luffy is the newest sun god Nika, bringer of liberation, and it sure did seem like he was powering the Iron Giant, like he was the ancient power source that powered the Iron Giant. And Vegapunk clearly wants to study this infamous power source, and he has no problem having human test subjects, so it'll be interesting to see what he does when he learns that his comrade is the sun god, and possibly the answer to this undying flame, creating your own sun thing. And I think it's pretty clear that Luffy is the power source, not only because he seems to have powered up the Iron Giant, but it's been made clear in other places that the power source is strong enough to rewrite everything we know about the world today, like maybe making goggles out of thin air. Speaking of the sun, now let's talk about the Iron Giant, and this is where my theorizing gets pretty wibbly wobbly. So go with me, I'm not good at this. The Void Century is the history of a war between 20 countries that rose up to rule and the ancient civilization that the Iron Giant came from. They tried to stop the Celestial Dragons from rising up, but they were destroyed. So I wonder if the ancient civilization that opposed the Celestial Dragons when they were trying to be formed are made up of the Fishmen, the Lunarians, and the Buccaneers. Stick with me. Joy Boy made a promise to the Fishmen, and during the Void Century, he failed to keep his promise. He broke his promise, and he wrote that apology letter that's on Fishman Island. So what if Joy Boy promised to help the ancient civilization fight back against these 20 countries and stop them from ruling over them and taking away their liberation? They failed, they lost the war, and Joy Boy was unable to keep his promise in the sense that, you know, he didn't help liberate them. He didn't help win the war, even though he tried. So when the Mother Flame was used on Lulisha, what happened was that the entire island, there was a crater in the earth where the island was, water continually pouring down, but the hole never filling up. Maybe the island was pushed down to the ocean floor. Maybe the ancient civilization was pushed down to the ocean floor. I don't fully understand the mechanics of the fishmen. I know that when they turn 30, their tail can split and become 2 feet. I also know that they could live into old age with a tail. I don't really understand all that, but maybe the reason they don't come to the surface anymore and the reason they are so oppressed is punishment for daring to rise up against those that made themselves into gods. And 200 years ago, they got their freedom in the sense that they were no longer enslaved, but they were still forced to stay down in the ocean. They couldn't come above. And when we do see them above, it's at Sabaday Archipelago, where the Celestial Dragons reign and where they're mistreating them, selling them, auctioning them off, treating them as subhuman. So Joy Boy and his ship, the Noah, promised to help win this war. They lost the war, which means that he broke the promise, and the fishmen agreed to protect the Noah until the promised day where this all could be fulfilled. So in the manga, when the promised day finally does come, which I reckon will be when Luffy defeats the Celestial Dragons, Luffy will be able to go back down to the ocean floor, and with the help of Princess Crybaby, they can have the sea beast raise the Noah up through the waters, bringing the fishmen with it, and they can live on land again without being oppressed. Because it really does seem like the celestial dragons are the ones oppressing them more than the rest of the world. Naturally, Noah's Ark also has very obvious biblical parallels, which we will talk more about in a minute. But first, I just said that the ancient kingdom was probably made up of the fishmen, the buccaneers, and the Lunarians, and then I talked about the fishmen, so let's talk about the buccaneers. The buccaneers have the prophecies about the bringer of liberation that will come and set their people free, much like the promised Joy Boy left with the fishmen. Plus, they're heavily prejudiced as well as the fishmen. Just because you're a buccaneer, just because you've been born into this race, you are enslaved, hunted down, treated as subhuman, much like the fishmen. So this might also be the penalty of the race for having risen up against them so many years ago. Now, the Lumineers. Lunarians! It's fine. King was waiting for Joy Boy, and the Lunarians were the inhabitants of Marijoa before the incident of God Valley. It was the land of the gods, and the Lunarians were known as gods. So again, King was waiting for Joy Boy. There was some sort of prophecy, myth, legend that was passed down by his people, and they were waiting for the one to come, just like these other races. And the Lunarians were wiped out. They're an extinct race, so it sounds like they've had the same kind of treatment as the buccaneers and the fishmen. That's not to say there's no other prejudice in the world, but it does seem like the stigma on these three races are something on a totally different level. Like the minks exist in the world, and they're not treated the same way as these three races are. Okay, so the Iron Giant was built 900 years ago, but it attacked Marijoa 200 years ago. I don't know what reactivated it 200 years ago. I can't think of a reason, but if it was activated 900 years ago for the war and it was programmed to fight the celestial dragons in the war, then when it was exposed to a strong enough power source 200 years ago and it started climbing the wall again, it's possible that when it woke back up, when it was restarted, it just continued on with that same programming, with that same goal that it had 900 years ago. It tried to climb the wall so that it could get to the celestial dragons and continue fighting them. However, it ran out of power, and now here we are today. Seems like it's found its power source, probably from, you know, the sun god being near it. And when it does, it might continue that goal. So shout out to Frosty in my Discord, because I mentioned what theories you have around the Iron Giant, and he said, I think the Iron Giant is going to be the thing that fights Saturn, and that little sentence is what birthed this entire spiral, because I was like, why would it fight Saturn? What would be the point? Programming. Okay, let's go back. What does that mean? Wait, what about these different races? Why are they so prejudiced? Like, it was a spiral that came from that, so shout out to Frosty for starting that spiral. All right, continuing on with the biblical parallels. Check out this verse in Isaiah. How you are fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning. How you are cut down to the ground, you who weakened the nations. For you have said in your heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will also sit on the mount of the congregation on the farthest sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. You shall be brought down to Sheol, to the lowest depths of the pit. Okay, a lot to unpack in that. The celestial dragons are people, humans, who have elevated themselves to gods, or they've tried to. That's the title they've given themselves. That's the kind of power they want to have, but they themselves have no sort of actual godship. They're just mortals who have promoted themselves above the stars of God. They're trying to promote themselves to the highest heights, to the greatest honors, without having anything to make them worthy of such a status. Then you have Emu, who placed himself on the empty throne, and in the end, but they'll be cast down into hell, and you know, you have all the symbolism around Saturn right now coming out of a summoning circle and having all this demonic imagery around him, showing that, yeah, these guys are evil. They're definitely opposed to the sun god. Emu being the leader of the fallen makes sense to me. Also, there was a video that I made, I don't know how long ago, where I compared Impel Down to not only Dante's Inferno, but I actually compared the whole manga really to the Divine Comedy. I compared that entire saga to the Divine Comedy, but then I actually looked forward into recent chapters at the time that I filmed that video, which was like 4 months ago, recent chapters and how that also parallels with the end of the Divine Comedy. And as we continue on, and Oda's doing these biblical parallels, it's even more. Even more. So in that video, the first half of the video focused on Dante's Inferno, which is the part focusing on hell and the different spheres of hell. And then you go into purgatory, and then the end of the Divine Comedy, it ends in paradise, where you go through the realms of heaven and eventually go to the throne room of God and all the things. Near the end of the video, I talked about the different components of paradise in the Divine Comedy, the different spheres that were in paradise. Some of them were 5 planets, the 5 planets that the 5 elders are named after are the 5 planets mentioned in the Divine Comedy, as well as the sun being one, sun god Nika, the moon, which I had a couple theories about who could be the moon, and then there were a couple of other spheres that I didn't quite know what to do with. But after forming the theory of the Fishman Island, the Buccaneers, and the Lunarians being the people of the ancient kingdom that rose up against the Celestial Dragon and are now being prejudiced and treated terribly and wiped out because of that, it actually made those other spheres make a lot of sense. So the moon I mentioned could be Blackbeard, could be Emu. Still could, but now I kind of think it might be the Fishman, because one of the descriptors of the moon sphere is that it was people who were unable to keep their promise. Joy Boy failed to keep his promise for the Fishmen, and now the Fishmen are trying to keep their promise to protect the Noah. Also, one of the descriptors of the moon sphere was that they were knocked out of their high places, their position of power. They were knocked out of their position of power. The Fishmen were enslaved. Then in the Divine Comedy, you have the 8th sphere, which is the sphere of the fixed stars. This represents faith, hope, and love. I didn't know what to do with that in this video, but now I think maybe the Buccaneers, because Kuma is the encapsulation of faith, hope, and love. Faith in the liberator that is coming for them, and all the Buccaneers had that faith. Hope that he would come and he would bring them that liberation that's been promised to them. And love. Kuma is love. He just is. That's his entire character. That's been his entire character arc. That's his core instinct that is going to knock the programming out of place and allow him to fight next to his daughter. It's love. So the fixed stars, Buccaneers. The 9th sphere is the sphere of the angels. At the time I said, hey, there's some seraphim. There's the angels, but the Lunarians. I also made an observation in that video about the Chamber of Flowers that Emu often is found just chilling in, and how that also parallels the location where God was in the Divine Comedy. There's a lot of things that line up with that. You can check out the video if you want. I'm not going to repeat everything in it. I'm just building on what was said then based off of new information. I could be wrong about everything. Another biblical parallel, I thought that since the tree on Ohara is called the Tree of Knowledge, I thought that meant that the One Piece was going to be there, because the tree of the knowledge of good and evil was in the Garden of Eden. So I figured, the One Piece might be in Eden, because the people were kicked out of Eden after they sinned, and then that was barred off, and you can't find the One Piece unless you know exactly where to look. But Kuzan, he specifically said, if there was a red poneglyph in Ohara, I would have noticed. I saw none of that, so I don't think it's there. Anyway, that was a lot based off of very little, but what we do know is that Vegapunk holds the answers about the Void Century in his brain fruit head, and Saul, too, has the books on Elbaf. So regardless of what the answers are, we're gonna be getting the answers pretty soon. Having a companion who has all the answers, and we're likely going to Elbaf, which holds all the answers, they're coming. I've mentioned in a couple of videos and in my last chapter review, no. 2 chapter reviews ago, I've mentioned a couple of times that I think that Kuma knew all along that Luffy was the one that ate the Sun God Nika fruit. Because he had the prophecies, he knew who he was waiting for, and probably there were some clues in those prophecies to help him to be able to recognize the liberator, the bringer of liberation, when he came. So that was just kind of a off the wall, okay, I'm pretty sure Kuma would know, so I think the reason he guarded their ship for 2 years and the reason he let Zoro take on Luffy's pain is because he knew who he was working with. Not because it's Dragon's son, but because he knew that this was the one. This was the one. That was all but confirmed in the last chapter, because we find out that Kuma knew all along that the bringer of liberation had rubber-like abilities, and I think Kuma is smart enough to be able to put 2 and 2 together and just like keep an eye on Luffy, because he knew like, hey, you're probably it. He may not have known 100%, but he probably was. I mean, Kuma did go back and watch him when he was 15. My thought was that he was probably looking out for Luffy because he had strong suspicions that that's the one, and I think that was all but confirmed in this last chapter. So I think we're gonna come out of this flashback and have Luffy, the Seraphim, and maybe even Kizaru fighting against Saturn, and Kuma is gonna show up on Egghead and see the bringer of liberation, the one that's been prophesied, the one that he's been waiting for, actively fighting to save his daughter from the enemy. Then, seeing Bonnie in person, the very thing that the world government tried to keep from happening, they wanted to keep these two apart, it won't happen anymore. Kuma will be there, he'll see her, and his programming will be overridden, and he too will fight against the one who oppressed him his entire life. I know Bonnie saw him on Sabati Archipelago, but we don't have any confirmation that he saw her or that he interacted with her in any way. So as far as I'm concerned, his programming being overridden by his core instinct would require him to have that connection, not just her. I'll also note, and I said this in my last chapter review, I'll also note that a patron, Jordan, mentioned in one of my chapter reading streams that he had a theory that Kuma was going to paw all of his pain out of himself and put it on Saturn, and that would be part of the fight, that would weaken him. And I just love that theory so much, just because thematically Kuma taking all the pain that's been given to him by the Celestial Dragons and the Elders and Saturn specifically, all of this pain over a lifetime, taking it off of him and putting it on Saturn, and let that be an active fighting move, something that weakens Saturn so that he can be defeated. Just like, that's a symphony to me. I love it so much. I hope Oda does it. Not my theory, Jordan's theory, but I love it. I'm really, really hoping for a group fight. Typically, big boss fights are, the Straw Hats are given their oppositions of equal measure, oppositions within the crew that they're fighting against, and then it's Luffy against the big bad, and then Luffy, big punch, win. I've brought it up 100 times, I'll bring it up again. Thriller Bark was one of the best final fights of an arc because it was the whole crew working together. Luffy still got to land the final punch because he should, because he's the hero of the story, but they all worked together, and I loved it so much. And it might be too much for me to hope for, but I would love to see Luffy, Kuma, Straw Hats, Bonnie all fighting side by side against the one that has been oppressing this world. Well, one of the ones. Sorry, editing Murphy here because I forgot to mention something. It's something that I talked about in my chapter review for 1096, so I'll keep it kind of brief, but continuing on with the biblical parallels with Saturn literally coming out of a summoning circle and opposing himself against sun god Nika, and then we have Bonnie who has stabbed the Elder, the Great Elder, and is now being held up for persecution, being held up to atone for her sins. And with Kuma already being set up as a character who takes the pain off of other people and then puts it on himself, takes their pain on for himself so that they don't have to suffer. It just thematically makes sense to me that once we get out of this flashback, Kuma will arrive on Egghead, see Bonnie being set up to pay for her sins, and he'll step in and take that payment on himself. That Kuma will be the one that atones for her sins, therefore making her be able to go free and not have to take the punishment herself. And if Kuma is meant to be a parallel or a representation of Jesus, then it wouldn't be too out of line to say that a resurrection is in order as well. I famously hate fake out deaths and resurrections, and it's probably the thing that I complain about with One Piece the most is the fake out deaths, but thematically it would work in this arc, and I'm weak and I just want to see Kuma and Bonnie happy, so I'm kind of hoping for it. So according to the themes that have been set up in this arc and my reading of those themes, which admittedly could be completely off base, my prediction for how this could potentially go is Kuma arriving on Egghead, seeing his daughter being set up for punishment. He steps in and is able to shield her from that, and that is his death scene, which I would predict could potentially be a long death scene where Bonnie and Kuma are able to have one last conversation, probably at the horizon of the sea, because Oda is a cruel mistress. And we get a full-blown death scene, but that is a fake out, be it because Kuma is able to stand back up and keep fighting, or because his consciousness is moved to another figure, or, you know, anything. Either way, Kuma lives on in one way or another. And then Kuma is able to fight alongside Luffy to take Saturn down. If this isn't going to be a fake out and Kuma doesn't get a for real death, then Bonnie, I think, will probably sail on with the Straw Hats, which would be super cool because I absolutely love Bonnie, but I would love even more for her to be able to have a life with her dad. She's 10. Let her have her father. Or 12 at this point? I think she's 12 at this point. Anyway, voiceover Murphy done. Okay, so that's all the theorizing for Egghead. Now let's go beyond a little bit. I have been saying for like a year and a half now, occasionally I bring it up, not all the time, that I think that the next time the 4 emperors are going to meet, or any of the 4 emperors are going to meet, it's going to be on Laugh Tale. It's just always looked really beautiful in my mind for all of them to be after the One Piece and they all arrive on Laugh Tale at the same time. That's the place where Luffy and Shanks get to see each other and have a conversation. That's where Luffy and Blackbeard will fight. Shanks might even join in at some point, but eventually step aside and let Luffy handle it. That's where Luffy will find the One Piece and laugh and finally become the Pirate King. And then my kind of gag theory that I secretly hope is true is that Buggy will somehow get the credit and everyone will think that he's the Pirate King and he'll be chased and like hate his life because of the target that puts on his back, and then Luffy will just live happily with the knowing that the title is actually his. Anyway, since we're theorizing in this video, I have to shoehorn my what is effectively fan fiction for what the ending will be. But I do think that this theory is slowly gaining a little bit more grounding with the fact that Blackbeard faced off against Law and won and got his poneglyphs, and plus he has Pudding, like they kidnapped Pudding. Shanks faced off against Kid and got Kid's poneglyphs, and Buggy has declared that he wants to try to find the One Piece, and Luffy, too, has declared that he'd like to try to find the One Piece. So, I don't know, they all roads seem to be leading to Laugh Tale. I don't know for sure what is coming, but what we do know is that whatever happens, the events will shake the world. So it sounds like Saturn's gonna lose. I'll also mention, out of contractual obligation, that Caribou is technically still here, and there's been foreshadowing that he's gonna participate in some kind of way, but I refuse to acknowledge it beyond that, and I refuse to theorize about it. Down with Caribou. I still don't know what to do with Queen Lily. She was a part of the Void Century. She was a part of these 20 nations, but she didn't want to participate. She left, and supposedly they thought that she went home, but she never made it home. But there was a letter. The letter explained that she is a member of the Will of D, and that is also passed on to Cobra and to Vivi. What's all that mean? Don't know. I reckon she was probably a part of the opposition as well. Like maybe she fought in this war too, and that's why she never made it home. And her being a part of the Clan of D or the Will of D, that indicates that she is, you know, setting herself against the Celestial Dragons and the Elders and the Emu and all the things. But how to cohesively make that work in all of the nonsense that I have just said, I don't know. Really quick before we end the video, a couple of other parallels that I noticed that I just want to point out because I really like them. Kobe is a really cool parallel to Kuma. He was enslaved, but he was able to get free and set the other prisoners free. He's also very humble, and he sacrificed himself for Boa. Blackbeard is an interesting parallel to York. He wants to create a pirate haven, which, by the way, was historically a thing that pirates had. They had pirate havens. They seem super awful, but cool in theory. He wanted to create a pirate haven and become king of it, and on his island he captured and sold people off to the Celestial Dragons. My perception of that has always been that he participated in human trafficking, just like how Sabati Archipelago is, specifically because he wanted to gain that promotion of being able to make this his pirate haven and become king of this haven. And in order to do that, he participated in this trade so that he could get favor from the Celestial Dragons and get that promotion. York wanted to become a Celestial Dragon, so she betrayed her own so that she could get the promotion. Anyway, I'm probably really off base. Like I said, I'm not a theorizer. This is not my strong suit, but my brain got spinning when I did my reread of Egghead, so I thought I'd share some of that with you. Thanks for being here if you actually stuck it out this long. I don't even know if you could follow the nonsense that I said. But feel free to chat with me about it in the comments. You can tell me how wrong you think I am. I think I'm wrong too. I post videos every Monday and Friday on this channel, Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays on the book channel, which is always linked in the description. Chat with me more in the comments. I'll see you again soon. Bye.